All right, so coming up next, we have the Raise Your Voice panel. I'd love everybody to join me on cam for that panel. Awesome. Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Exciting to be here. Yeah. Okay, so first of all, I want to say thanks to everyone for joining this panel. I think we'd all agree that now more than ever, panels like this with this particular topic is necessary and urgent. And so I'm thankful that you are lending your voices to talk about it. I'm not gonna, and I hope you guys don't mind, I'm gonna just mention your most recent book. I had some formal introductions planned, but I think it's more important to kind of get to the conversations. So here we have a group of people that really don't need an introduction, to be honest. We have Angie Thomas, most recently author of Find Your Voice, which is a journal dedicated to helping young people and really all people find their creative voice and their place in this world. We have authors Becky Albertalli and Aisha Saeed, authors of Yes, No, Maybe So, most recently. And we'll get into that story, but definitely super urgent right now. We have author Lamar Giles, author of Not So Pure and Simple. And that book is very interesting in some of the complex topics it deals with, masculinity and how that operates in society. And then we have Kelly Yang, author of Parachutes, which just came out and is making waves, certainly discussing some tough but necessary topics. So thank you all for coming. We appreciate it. Let's just get right into it, right? You guys good with that? Okay. So Kelly, I'm going to start with you. So your book is the book that I most recently was able to read, and it not only wowed me, but there were some key lines in the story that we marked. Just thinking about how when you reflect those things in today's society and like what's happening, especially this week, what that really means. So there's a line in your story that says, "Our voice is our armor." What does that mean to you? Our voice is our armor.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you so much for having me on this panel. I feel really privileged to be here as a YA debut author. So that line to me, it means speaking up about what's not right and what's bothering me, what's bothering you, what's bothering all of us. And I just want to start right now by saying what's bothering me right now is that an Asian American police officer stood by and watched a Black man get murdered. I could not, my heart broke when I saw that footage. And I want to first of all start by apologizing on behalf of Asian Americans everywhere. You know, we have got to step up. We have got to do more for our Black and brown brothers and sisters because we are in the struggle together. And I want to address that there's a long history of Asian American discrimination against African Americans. I called that out in my debut novel, Front Desk, and I'm going to call it out again today. It is not okay. We have to call out racism when and where we see it. We have to call out systems that excuse violence, that perpetuate violence. And Parachutes is my way of calling out systems that protect the perpetrator, that work against the victim. Because what happened to me was that I was sexually assaulted when I was a student, a very young law student at Harvard Law School. I had skipped a crazy number of grades and gone to college at the age of 13 and then went to law school at Harvard at the age of 17. I never expected to be sexually assaulted while I was there. And when I finally spoke up about it to the administration, not only did they not believe me, but they came after me for malicious prosecution. And at one point, my own law degree that I earned was threatened. It was almost taken away. And I carried that with me for many, many, many years. And in many, many, many instances, I wanted to talk about it, to share my story, but I was afraid because I was afraid that I was going up against hundreds of years of power. I mean, here I was, and at that point I wasn't, Kelly Yang bestselling author. I was just little Kelly, the law student that had my entire identity almost taken away. And it really took the courage of so many people going before me, so many women speaking up about their truth, speaking up against Harvey Weinstein, speaking up against, you know, other cases at Harvard Law School that had happened, because there was a long history of this. That gave me the courage to write Parachutes. And that line, our voice is our armor, that line to me just means that the truth protects us. Yes, these people are powerful, but if we raise our voices, we are more powerful. We are the power.
Thank you so much, Kelly, not only for the answer, but for sharing your story. We know that these are difficult subjects to talk about, which you probably mentioned that in addition to talking about sexual harassment, we're going to talk about police brutality. There's some difficult subjects, but things that need to be discussed, and especially now. So thank you, Kelly, for sharing that. I wanted to go over to Becky and Aisha. Your book shows teenagers, people who are at the moment too young to actually vote, and yet they're trying to make difference in a few different ways. Sometimes Maya and Jamie both experience setbacks. So what would you do to encourage young people to have a role in the upcoming election, even though they can't physically cast a vote?
Okay.
First? Yep.
Sure. I mean, the book, Yes, No, Maybe So, was inspired from the 2016 election. And when Donald Trump won, it was one of the most devastating days of my life. And as we've seen, things just continue to spiral since then. And shortly after that election, there was an election here, a special election for an open seat that a Republican House congressman had left, and it was going to be a special election, and there was a Democrat running, and he said he was going to speak truth to power and stand up to Trump. And Becky and I both live in this district, and so we decided to canvass, and we're both, I mean, not to speak for you, Becky, but I think I'm more on the introvert side of the spectrum. So the thought of knocking on people's doors that I don't know sounded terrifying, but we were so upset and we felt so powerless that we're like, this is something we can do. And so we did. And the experience actually turned out to be really uplifting and hopeful, and gave a really strong sense of community, because a lot of times you can feel like you're the only person who feels this way, especially in our district, which was deeply, deeply red for so long, 40 years, that you think you're a very small minority in that. And so being able to be with others who agreed with you and doing that work, it was really empowering. And so from there, a story idea was born. Becky, if you want to elaborate.
Yeah, well, and I think one of the things that's been complicated with this book is, you know, this is a book where, you know, it's not a book about canvassing, but it's a book where we watch these kids go door to door, and that is kind of how they demonstrate their activism, and that's how they engage with this system, the political system. And you know, and then there was COVID, and that's not necessarily like a safe option anymore. And so I've been thinking a lot about, you know, just what could that activism look like for teens? And obviously, you know, I think, you know, we know about phone banking, we know about text banking, but like one of the things, particularly this week, and maybe I'm speaking this week specifically to non-Black teenagers, and particularly white teenagers, you know, one of the things that you can do right from quarantine, and actually you're well positioned to do it, is you can be the one to have those conversations with your white parents, you know, and it's not like a one-time conversation. You know, it's not always fun, and sometimes these are conversations you even need to have with your white liberal parents, you know, because they're, you know, like there are different shades to kind of understanding, you know, what's happening right now with, you know, the reaction to, you know, the murders that happened in Minneapolis and Louisville, and you know, that's what I would challenge you to do this week and moving forward.
Thank you both so much. Those are great suggestions, and to kind of hear the origin story of it. And then what's interesting about all of these stories is that, you know, these stories were written probably quite a while ago, I'd imagine in most cases, and yet here they're now more relevant than ever. And so it's important that we read these. And I think the thing about young adult literature, especially today, is the sophistication of it, and how relevant it is to what's happening right now, so that it transcends just the necessity for young people to read it. But these are stories that old and young alike need to digest and consider. And on that note, we'll move over to Lamar. Lamar, in your story, Not So Pure and Simple, our main character, Dell, in an attempt to get closer to a girl he's interested in, decides to join her church group, and he inadvertently signs a purity pledge. The topic of teen sex and abstinence is not often covered this way in YA. And you personally have had a great run at writing mysteries and thrillers, which we all love. So what made you decide to switch gears and delve into such a delicate and intricate topic?
Well, I mean, the truth is, I don't know if Not So Pure and Simple was intended to be published at first. It was a school project. I was working on my MFA at Old Dominion University, and I'd already published Fake ID and Endangered. And so as a school project, I just wanted to challenge myself and do something different. So initially it was just a gag. This kid joins a purity pledge because he likes a girl in it. And I finished half the novel by the time I graduated. It wasn't sure where it was going. It was a bit of a mess. But the thing that changed is I graduated in spring of 2017. And in the fall of 2017, the Me Too movement happened. And as I was sitting back when the hashtag was blowing up, and I was reading all these really harrowing stories of how mostly men have done harm to women, I was like a person who suddenly realized that racism exists. I'm a man who suddenly realizes these horrible things happen. And I'm talking to my wife, my mom, my friends, and the thing I do is ask, what can I do to help? And the message that came back most often was, you need to talk to other men, because we've always known this is going on. You guys are the ones that are just experiencing the pain we go through. And that's when I knew where the book could go. And so from that point on, I took this half school project and completed what you see in front of you as a way to hopefully spark these conversations among adults and young men. So maybe adults can think about this more and do less harm, and maybe the young boys can stop before those bad attitudes cement.
Yeah, absolutely. And we appreciate that. It's interesting. We don't necessarily have a lot of men in color in YA right now. There's a handful, but the work that they're trying to do primarily and oftentimes in support of the issues that are happening around us. Because I think we have to kind of get in that mindset, right, where it's not about how is it necessarily just impacting the people that we love, the people that we come in contact with. If any human is being impacted by these things, we're all impacted on some level, right? We need to make the world safer and more assured for everyone. And on that subject, we have two people, Bree and Star in Angie's book, that try to speak out and advocate not just for themselves, but for their communities. So Angie, what is it about those two teen voices that you created that you think allows so many people to relate to that experience, even if it's not an experience they've personally lived?
You know, that's something I ask myself often, because I've had young people from all walks of life tell me that they relate to these characters in one way or another. Like, for instance, when The Hate U Give first came out, I was in Philly and I was at a school, and this young Black boy comes up to me. He's got his pants sagging and he's like, "Yo, Mom, I hate reading, but I read this in a day. This is dope." And then like months later, I go to Texas, and this young white girl who lives out on a farm in the middle of nowhere is like, "Oh my God, I connected with Star so much. And I love that gang member Devontae." Now, I don't know about that part, but the fact that this young woman and this young man both connected with these characters in some way, it meant a lot to me. But it also showed me that for young people, the common connector for so many of them is that they want to find their voices. They want to find ways to use their voices, and they often feel silenced. Now, that young Black man in Philly, he's going to be facing things that that white girl in Texas will never have to face in her life because of the systemic issues in our country, because of privilege, all of those things. But he wants to use his voice. He wants to find his voice. He wants to speak up and speak out. And that young lady in Texas, she wants to use her voice and speak up and speak out, but she's not sure how she can or what she can do it towards. And I think that's what so many young people are facing right now. They feel powerless. But I hope that all of them who read my books, or whether or not they read my books, I hope every young person in this country and honestly the world recognizes that they're some of the most powerful people in the world. And that's what I want to highlight through my books. Through Star and Bree, they find their power through different ways. For Bree is through hip hop. For Star is through activism. And both are legitimate ways of using your power and making yourselves heard. But every young person watching this right now, you're some of the most powerful people in the world. Do y'all know how much marketers pay to figure out what appeals to you? Do you realize you affect trends? The only reason TikTok is popular is because of y'all. That's power. I'm not getting on there. I'm too old for that. But y'all made TikTok. Y'all have so much power. Y'all create slang that becomes language in Webster's dictionary. Y'all affect trends. Y'all change the world in ways you don't quite understand yet. So you have the power to do that. I believe you got the power to change the world in other ways, because if you want to change the world, you just got to start by changing the world around you. And I think my characters showed them that and revealed to them the power in themselves, no matter what their background is. I hope it does.
No, absolutely. We appreciate that. And it just goes to show that in all pockets of life, and particularly in this country, you never know who needs these stories the most, and who the audience they're going to find, the hands they're going to be put into. And yet, invariably, it seems like there's always people who just didn't know, right? But who need the opportunity to see a different point of view, to walk in different shoes, and to develop compassion and empathy in this world. And I want to jump back to Kelly because Angie was talking about voices, and we all have a voice, and we all have varying degrees of a platform. But what happens when you speak up and sometimes people aren't receptive or turn you away? In your story, we already mentioned it includes sexual harassment and assault, and it also depicts the unjust aftermath of those experiences as the perpetrator attempts to portray themselves as the victim, while the actual victim is met with disbelief and, quite honestly, outright disinterest, after showing tremendous courage to speak up and speak out. So what's the message that you hope your readers take from that lesson? What conversations do you hope that part of the story generates?
Yeah, first of all, I really want people to see it, to see how it works. Because when you're going through something like this, and you're going through sexual assault, and you're going to the administration, you're telling them what happened, you get a lot of questions thrown at you, like, what were you doing there? What were you wearing? Why did you take a shower? Stuff like that. And you don't see the point of these questions, which is to distract. They distract from the fact that a crime has been committed. And you don't see what everybody is trying to do, which is what they're trying to protect, which is not you, which is that they're trying to protect the brand. And then you don't see that the people, even at the highest levels of institutions, are complicit in rape culture. I, first of all, really want teens, young people, anybody going through this to see that, so that they realize how it works, so that they don't feel so alone, and that they don't completely just descend into this hole of like blaming yourself, which is where I was for many years, trying to figure out, what did I do that got me there? The question is not what did I do, it's what did he do, right? It's what happened to me. And then the other part of it is just seeing the questions that come up with these administrations and these institutions and these systems, trying to make it seem like, you don't need to dwell on this. You can move on. You can put this away. You can put this aside. And those are all questions that I think really protect rape culture instead of dismantle it. We have to get kids to understand how it works so they can dismantle rape culture. I want teens everywhere to know what happened to me, and the fact that if it can happen even at Harvard freaking Law School, right? The very institution that's supposed to stand for justice, it means it can happen anywhere and to anyone. And we need to have these conversations way earlier, way earlier. You know, we need to stop with like waiting and trying to protect our kids, and have these conversations of consent when they're 12, when they're 13, when they're 14, so that they don't get into the situations that I get into. And boys need to read this book as well as girls.
I'm glad you made that last point, especially because kind of to Lamar's point earlier, so many times we ask the victims to do the heavy lifting, right? We ask those people to do the work that we should put upon the people who are perpetrating the crimes, who are perpetrating the hate, that type of rhetoric or those actions. We need to speak to our young men. And that's why a story, going back to Lamar for a moment, your story talks about what it takes to be a real man, and it examines that idea. Was the issue of toxic masculinity something that you intended to address from the start? And Lamar, why do you think it's important to keep this conversation alive about what it means to have manhood?
Yeah, certainly it's not something I intended to discuss from the start. Like I said, this is more so just to complete an assignment in the beginning. I didn't know where it was going. But once I did discover that toxic masculinity could be a through line, it became my mission to explore it in as many ways as I could. And I think the reason these conversations need to keep happening, and I'm going to give proper attribution here. Our good friend Jason Reynolds talked a bit about this on a keynote the other day when he was talking about anti-racism versus racism, and he mentioned anti-misogyny and misogyny. The idea being there's no finish line. So we need to keep having these discussions about what it takes to be a real man, and hear from women on this too, so that we can work on our behavior every day. There's never going to be a point when we can't be misogynist, where we can't be toxic. So to continue the conversations is to allow you to keep thinking about these things and all your actions, and recognize when you're going down that route and try to stop it. And if you didn't stop it, don't do it again, and recognize you did wrong.
That's great, and you know, it doesn't need a cosign, but I agree with everything you said, and I'm when people like you, when Black men like you and Jason talk about that and talk about those things and aren't afraid to also be vulnerable and to show the real strength in that. I think that's what our young people, and particularly our young men and also our men of color, need to see, is that true masculinity is being able to admit that we're all fallible and that we need help and that we don't have all the answers and that we need to just shut up and listen oftentimes, right? So appreciate that for sure. Going back to Becky and Aisha, to talk about some of these difficult interactions that take place, especially in your story there, you kind of show the entire gamut from smaller kind of microaggressions to some outright racism. Why do you feel it's important to show the full range that these hostile interactions can take, and to portray those events on the page? What were you kind of hoping to accomplish?
Do you want to?
You can go first. Go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, that's a really good question. A lot of it was very organic, in the sense that, like, just about everything, just about all of those incidents that we included in the book are based on things that are happening, in Georgia or other places in the U.S. or elsewhere, and a lot of them have happened to us personally. I think, one of the things that we talked about a lot kind of throughout this process and checked in with each other is, this is a book about a Muslim girl and a Jewish boy, and I'm Jewish and Aisha's Muslim, and and it's set kind of roughly now, but Islamophobia is a part of the story, and so is anti-Semitism. And you know, it's complicated to talk about both of those issues and do them both justice because they have some points in common, but you know, they play out very differently. And this is going to be a huge oversimplification, but like to give you a sense of what I mean, like I am, you know, a white Ashkenazi Jew. You know, I can walk. I mean, I'm not going anywhere now. I'm social distancing, but when leaving my house was a thing, you know, I can walk anywhere, and I am read as, you know, kind of a white lady, you know, and you know, and that's a very different experience than Aisha and Maya, her character, had day to day. You know, there were things about 2016 and kind of the events that unfolded afterwards that were like shocking for me in a way that shows some of my privilege. But, you know, anti-Semitism, and particularly recently, is a very real thing that I didn't want to trivialize. So it's sort of like, how do we talk about both, but not necessarily talk about them as like kind of, you know, like we don't have to be even-handed, I guess. Like they play out differently. It looks different. It feels different sometimes.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times, you know, there's the racism or, you know, anti-Semitism where it's actually said, like it's just blatant, but then there's so many different layers. And there's a lot of conversations I'm seeing online about that right now, about white privilege and systematic, you know, issues and how, you know, things, yes, there's the KKK, but then there's also those subtle things, like the subtle racism that happens. And so, and oftentimes, I know for me growing up, like, I often used to gaslight myself and say, oh, did that happen? Or am I just misinterpreting it? Is this really happening? And I know, you know, I know a lot of kids, you know, do that still, you know, where something happens and you think, is it just in my head? And I wanted in this story for there to be conversations about that, about microaggressions, and about gaslighting and what that looks like. And to unpack that on the page, because I think, you know, raising your voice and speaking your truth is really important, but there are going to be people, if what you're saying is uncomfortable and they don't want to hear it, they're going to find ways to put you down. And it's easy to think away somebody like who's openly aggressive, but it's harder when they're smiling and they're saying things that sound right, but they're not right, you know, but the way that it's said, the gaslighting. And so we really wanted to also explore that in this book, because racism, there's many different types, many different groups experience it differently and more disproportionately. And that was definitely something that we discussed as we were writing this.
Thank you, Aisha and Becky. And I think like I've seen a lot of those forums and those conversations centered around what constitutes racism and prejudice, right? And people are so quick to try to kind of splice the line and say, well, I wouldn't do that thing. Like you said, I'm not an outright racist. I believe in this. I voted for this, right? Mm-hmm. But the real need is to give a true evaluation, because the only person who really knows, right, what's going on and how we truly feel is ourselves. And that it's going to be evident, though, in a lot of times in smaller, more subtle situations, subtle ways. Those things are going to come across how we truly feel, maybe in the heat of the moment. So it's important that we do the work now, right, before we get into these situations. So also maybe that can prevent some of the things that we see happening in the world if we deal with those things and confront them and be honest. And some things are may feel intrinsic. Some things we may have inherited from our upbringing, but it's still important to do the work, to not make excuses for what we think. And all of us have reflection to do in those various regards. Angie, I wanted to turn to you for this question. I was listening to some Tupac here this week, and I think a lot of people probably were. So if Tupac was still with us, what do you think he would say right now? How do you think he'd feel about the world? I know I'm asking you to speak for a legend, but even as I see the hat on you there, you know, I feel like you represent him properly.
I hope I am. And I see that we got a lot of questions. Like people are like, "What's
Yeah.
your shirt?" So
Yeah.
it says "Just Us for Justice." If you read The Hate You Give, that's the name of the organization in the book. If you saw the movie, when I make my guest appearance in the film, I'm actually wearing this shirt. So that's a little plug. But Just Us for Justice, like I said, it's an organization in the book. But for me, it's also a philosophy, as we see so often lately, especially when it comes to Black lives and the fact that they matter. The only way we get justice is if we speak up and speak out ourselves. It takes us doing it. So at the end of the day, it's just us for justice. It takes us to get justice. So that's what it means to me. So it felt like it was right to wear this shirt. As far as Tupac, I think he pointed out this phrase right here, thug life. I thought about it the other day. I was like, if Tupac had Twitter, oh my God.
Wow.
Like if Tupac was alive with a Twitter account right now, like I'm sure he'd probably get banned or something at some point. Like he would be wilding out. You know, I remember his aunt said a couple years ago, she was talking about the fact that so many people say he's alive. And she's like, as many things that have been going on in this country, do you really think Tupac would be silent? He would not be chilling in Cuba somewhere right now, y'all. He would have spoke up about Katrina. He would have spoken up about all of these Black Lives Matter cases. He would have been said something. So nah, he wasn't the silent type. But I think he would remind us of the things he's already said in his music. One of my favorite lines of his is that the power is in the people and politics we address. He was raised to be people minded. He was raised to realize that the power truly is in the people. His mom, Afeni, was a Black Panther who represented herself in a court of law and beat 70 charges of conspiracy against the US government. And this woman only had a high school diploma, and she represented herself in a federal court of law by going to a library and reading books on law. She did that. So he came into this world knowing the power was in the people. And I think he would be reminding us of that. And I think too, he would have issue with the fact that every time we say our lives matter, that Black lives matter, people want to say, well, all lives matter. You would not go to a breast cancer walk and tell those people that lung cancer matters. You don't do that. We're talking about a specific issue. All lives should matter, but we got a systemic problem in this country where Black lives don't matter enough. Black lives matter too. And I think Pac would be one of the loudest voices in reminding people of that. So yeah, I think he'd get banned off social. I think he'd be a part of the movement. I think he'd be out there helping the people, and he'd be funding these bailouts, these bail funds that are being spread around social media right now. If you want to help with the movement and you don't know what to do yourself, donate to a bail fund and help get some of these protesters and these activists out of jail as they try to make themselves heard. That's a big step. So I think he'd be all about that.
Yeah, thank you. And like, it's ironic, you're right, he probably would be banned from platforms and at a time in which people with supposedly more power aren't being banned for the things they're saying. One question I just wanted to kind of give you all, and maybe to like kind of let us all take a little bit of a breath. In all of your books dealing with very complex social issues, right? But there's also moments of humor and levity provided in all your work. Why do you think it's important? What did you think about it, the ability to make someone take a deep breath or a sigh or a laugh, or just be able to kind of feel a little bit of the emotional resonance, a slight break from the emotional resonance? What do you think that does to help your readers digest your stories you're trying to tell?
Yeah.
Any of you? Yeah, any of you? Yeah.
Should I go first? Okay. Yeah, absolutely. I think when you're going through anything, you still have to go through life. And that's what I always remember, in my own life, that, there might be horrible times where I'm called Chinese virus, but then I still got to make dinner for my kids, and it is so sad that you have to sometimes still get on with your life. But that doesn't mean that we have to stop thinking about what happened. And it's that balance. It's like, I need to live, I need to do these things, but I have the right to feel this pain. I'm gonna feel it. And I can decide when and where I get to access that pain when I want to, on my own terms, on my own timeline. I don't have to dwell in it today, all of it. I can do that, but I can still kind of carry on. And that's an important message to give to kids, is that, you know, we do have to still keep going about our lives, but we can affect change by doing so.
And I think something that guided Becky and I as we wrote this book was that even though we were canvassing during a really difficult time and there was a lot of anger and fear, there was also joy. There was those funny moments, like you knock on a door and there's like a kid standing there with his face pressed against the glass going, "Mom," but nobody's coming, and you're like, okay, you know, like there's all these little funny moments. And I really do believe that a friend of mine, Aisha Saeed, she says, joy is an act of resistance. And I really believe that. Every day on Twitter, I've been asking, what small joy will you savor today? And I actually have been asking myself that since 2016. I actually write that down since 2016, but I took it to social recently. And I feel like when you come from a marginalized community, even your joy can be very radical. I wrote a picture book, Bilal Cooks Doll, about a little boy who cooks with his dad. And I've gotten comments, oh, that Muslim man is cooking with his child? Like it's a father cooking. And I'm like, I didn't intend for that to be some kind of political statement about, but it is. Like, it's almost like everything that you do is interpreted and dissected. And so yeah, so there is, even in our joy, there's some of that, but I do strongly believe that we can't keep going on and on if we don't harness some joy and have those moments. Otherwise we cannot keep doing the fight that we need to.
Anyone else want to comment
Yeah,
on it?
yeah. I have to agree with that. Our joy is radical. Our joy is a form of resistance at times. And self-care is so important through all of this. And we have to remember that this is a marathon, not a sprint. We got to pace ourselves, and we got to have those moments of joy and laughter and find those things. That's why for me, it was important in my books to have those lighter moments. Like in The Hate U Give, there's like Star, Seven, Devontae, and Chris are like in the middle of trying to navigate around protests and riots in the community. And they're in the car having a conversation about whether mac and cheese is a side dish or a full meal. For the record, it is a side dish. All right. Anyway, but they're having a whole conversation about mac and cheese, and they're talking about these things, and they're having this moment of lightness in the midst of that. So it's so important. It's so important. When I was writing the book, I had to think about the most difficult thing I went through, which was the passing of my grandmother. The most difficult day was not the day she passed, but her funeral, because funerals are so final. But what got me through that day was being with my family and having those moments where we're laughing and talking about my grandmother and sharing stories and just not crying out of sadness, but crying because we've laughed so hard, you know? So I had to put that in my books. I have to remind my readers that even during all of this, our joy is powerful. Our joy is our strength, and we find it. Our joy gives us reason to fight. So find your joy, find your light moments, and keep going. And remember, marathon, not a sprint.
Absolutely.
I'll say this, I might be the outlier because I use humor not as a pressure relief, but as an infiltration tool, because I think people love to laugh at other folks. So when you read my book and you're laughing at Dell and he's embarrassing, I can sit back and say, yeah, that's funny. You never thought that? You never said that? You never did that? And hopefully that helps people think about, if it was wrong and embarrassing when Dell did it, what do you think you were when you were doing it? You weren't Idris Elba. So my whole thing is humor masks my trickster nature.
Yeah, we appreciate that. Becky, did you want to add anything, or?
Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry, I can't say it as well as my co-panelist did. I'm soaking it in.
No, so I just want to say thank you, because you all said it very well. And you know, this is a panel that dealt with a lot of difficult subject matter, but I'm so grateful to be a part of it and to be counted among all of your work in helping people to find their voice, not just now, but in the future as well when it's necessary. So thank you all so much. We thank everyone who's watching, and please support all of the writers here. Buy their books, read their books, talk about their books, and thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Justin.
you.
Thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you so much.
Enjoy the rest of your day.
you.